Morning, Heather. Welcome to Hobby of a Lifestyle. How are you today?
Hi, Andy. I'm good, thank you. Yes, very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you very much. And obviously, thank you very much for your time. Heather, former silver medalist of the modern pentathlon, from Olympic silver medalist, I should add. Um, let's explore how you got into this. I'm looking, was watching it a few times, look at the disciplines and think, what is it that really gets you into to this sport and to this event? So let's go back to as a child, kind of where did you grow up and what were you into?
I was just totally sporty, just loved all sports and yeah, jumped at anything. I did swim from a very young age, so my parents had prioritized giving me swimming lessons and just happened to have the coach that taught me to swim happened to be an Olympic coach. I mean, at that point, he was definitely not. I wasn't talent ID'd by any chance, but yes, his there was sort of a bit of a dynasty at the private school where I went to swim. I wasn't at that school, and he sort of, I guess, was a bit of a mentor. And I went to the local club, like that wasn't under him, and just loved swimming, and got to the point where I sort of wanted to take my swimming to the next level. And the club, I did all the sessions that were possible, sort of swimming. I was swimming before school at primary school, but it didn't feel like a chore. It was just sort of something I did. And
Yeah.
then, I'd get picked up and taken to primary school in the mornings and things. And alongside that, I lived on a farm, so I was surrounded by horses, and that was my mum's job, was training other people's horses, giving riding lessons,
Right.
also training race horses. So the riding element and the swimming element were already very much ingrained.
Yeah.
And then I loved running, did all school cross country and everything, and I played team sports as well. But it sort of started to go more down the individual sports. And there's something which is quite alien to people who don't who don't know, and most people don't, 'cause it's quite niche. And something called the Pony Club, which basically, if you ride, you can become a member of. And there's loads of different events, and mostly all riding disciplines. But there's one discipline that sort of pricked my ears more, called tetrathlon. Now, there's lots of athlons which will get confusing, but tetrathlon is horse riding, swimming, running, and the only one I was missing was shooting. So I learned to shoot at about the age of 8,
Right.
for that, and I loved it because yeah, I was quite good at it, I guess, and because I had those unusual skills, but also the riding element. You did have to ride your own horse, and even though I was brought up with horses, I was a relatively good rider. We never had a good pony or a good horse, because we always had the ones that, once they were good enough, they got sold or got sent back to whoever owned them.
Right.
So I saw it as a real disadvantage as a child, and used to get very frustrated and upset that the riding was always the last event, and I'd often be in the lead on sort of the Saturday was the swim, shoot, and the run, and I'd often be winning my competition, and I'd be lucky if I sort of came top 6 after the riding, because I'd have to take the easier route, or have issues on the ride. And I had friends who I saw as I was as good as, but they would have maybe a horse that helped them a bit more. So I used to, yeah,
Right.
as a youngster, I found that quite difficult and didn't really understand what I was learning, and actually how much it benefited me later down the line.
Well, yeah, I suppose like before we get to the benefits later down the line, as a child, do you, and we see this in so many different sports where maybe people don't have access to the same equipment or don't have access to the same facilities. Do you think there was a lot of talent that was lost because of the similar situation to what you were in?
Um, Sorry, say that again.
So obviously we're talking about access to facilities, access to
Yeah,
equipment and whatnot, and actually some people just become disillusioned because they maybe don't have the same access. Do you feel like there was a lot of talent lost because people were in similar situations to yourself?
yeah, yeah.
And
Sorry,
what,
and I see what you're saying now.
yeah, yeah, and what made you different from those people who decided to actually be, you know, it was easier to throw the towel in because they didn't have that access. What was different between their mindset and your mindset?
I think, yeah, there's definitely loads. I mean, always you just see so much talent. You just think, gosh, there's talent everywhere that slips through the net. And I do quite a bit of work in schools and things now, and you just see so many talented athletes, and you think, wow, but talent's one thing, and it's the mindset. You have to have both together, don't you? So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I think the riding aspect, it gave me that sort of drive, I guess, and that desire, because I felt like I deserved to get better results than I did, or I could get better results than I did. Maybe deserved is a bit of a strong word. I didn't feel that at that time. I feel that looking back, I suppose.
yeah,
But it just made me sort of keen to prove to myself. But also, interestingly, and like the sort of dropout thing you see a lot in swimming. As a swimmer, I wanted to go swimming. I wanted to get up every morning. And I used to envy. I had a few friends whose parents would get them up in the morning. They'd come and bring them their breakfast cereal next to bed, and they'd take them to swimming. And I remember them telling me this in the change rooms, was like, "Oh yeah, I've had this sweet this morning," or "Mummy's packed me this," or whatever. And I used to think, "Wow, I had to wake up extra early so I could knock on my parents' door, and they'd say." come back in 5 minutes and we'll be up. And then I'd knock again and they still weren't out of bed. So I'd have to be like, come on, I want to go. I don't want to be late. And I'd literally have to beg them, drag them out of bed to take me swimming in the morning. And,
Right.
I had to do that for my whole swimming career until I was old enough to drive. And I used to sort of almost resent them, thinking that's not fair. Like, why? But then my friends whose parents did that, they dropped out, by the age of 15, 16.
Yeah.
And it's funny. And, you can't see that when you're at that age. You just sort of look with envy at your training partners and your friends and think, oh, that's not fair. So much easier for them. But
Yeah.
easy isn't necessarily the answer.
No, I totally agree, and I think it is life lessons, isn't it? And it's those little things that when you get older and you reflect, you appreciate. Maybe it's not at the time, but you do appreciate it 100%.
Mm,
I remember I was very fortunate. My parents took me everywhere that I used to go, but there was times where just because of work commitments or life commitments and having a younger sibling, that didn't happen, and it was like, well, you get the bus there and we'll pick you up. I
yeah,
remember I having to get 2 or 3 buses to go training
yeah,
just to make it on time, just to train for 2 hours and then get picked up. And sometimes maybe the odd time get the bus back, very rarely because it was later on, but every now and then you think,
yeah,
but actually, even just from a independence and life skills, it was
mm,
so important,
yeah.
isn't it? You need that.
I mean,
Um,
I lived in the middle of nowhere, and I've just had so many memories of waiting at the bus, like wherever the bus dropped us off, or waiting at a friend's house and feeling like an inconvenience because they're sort of getting on with their supper. My parents were always late to pick me up, and were always, because they were busy and they were trying to make ends meet. But I
yeah,
just sort of always felt a bit embarrassed that everyone else's parents were there watching them at swimming gala, and I'd have to get a lift with someone else's parents. And I'm still friends with those friends and their parents, and they still, they played a big part in my friend's parents played a big part in my career, which is really lovely. It sort of shows that it's not, it's not just your family; it's the bigger family, so to speak.
yeah, it's everyone's, and everyone's so busy now. Um, so you're doing these competitions. I do know who the Pony Club are. I used to work for riding for the Disabled Association for a little while, so
No,
I do know who they are.
oh, well done.
So I understand it, but again, the whole horse riding, but even when I worked for them, was a totally different world. Something I was never used to, and something I didn't realize. I think being from the northeast as well, pretty working class area, you see horse riding as something that affluent people do. It isn't
Hmm.
something that is,
Yeah.
I say, massively accessible. And I know it's still an expensive sport, but I
Mm,
didn't realize it's more accessible than what I thought.
mm.
Think through things like RDA, through Pony Club and whatnot, which I think is fantastic and probably enables more people to take part in things like modern pentathlon. So, I think that's really good. At what point did you decide? Obviously, you're doing the one of the athlons, the tetrathlon, and different things. At what point did modern pentathlon enter your life then? Because it sounds like you've been competing from such a young age, but swimming was still quite a major focus as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was very late, really. Partly because the women didn't compete in modern pentathlon at the Olympics until 2000, and
Yeah,
so that was when I was still at school. I think I was 17 when it became an Olympic sport. I mean, obviously, it became the Olympic sport 5 years before that, but I didn't know about it because it
yeah,
wasn't on the television. It wasn't talked about. It's been a men's Olympic sport since 1912, so that was a big changer. But it's a very small world, and again, it's one of those right place, right time. It just so happened that the people who were teaching me to shoot, volunteers at the local pony club, and they from the age of 8, and their daughter happened to be a girl called Kate Allenby, who went to win a bronze medal in the Sydney Olympics.
wow,
So I had this automatic role model that was just, it was almost like the path was then there for me to see. And I think that's so often the way. It's like how you see a young kid comes up to ask me, how do you become an Olympian? How do you do this? And it's, for me, I was lucky. There is luck involved. It's just where my path went, and I had someone that sort of almost set that, oh, that's doable. It's making it see like it's visible. She had a similar background. I mean, I was a stronger swimmer already, and I guess a stronger runner, but for my age. But yeah, there was suddenly that vision. However, yes, you touched on swimming. I wanted to be a swimmer. Like I saw that as the sort of pinnacle, and I wanted to go to the Olympics as a swimmer. And I got a swimming scholarship to go to the school that I talked about, which was incredible. And it meant, I could swim 10 times a week. I was swimming 20 hours a week, and
wow,
and I never missed a session. Like, I didn't ever, if I was slightly ill, I'd hide that I was slightly ill. I literally went to every single swimming session, and then at that point I was starting to run occasionally at lunchtimes. And once I started to hear about pentathlon, and later on I did go fencing, but again it was getting a lift. I used to get a lift with this gentleman called Dennis, who was 82 at the time, and he'd pick me up from
nice,
school, drive me to fencing half an hour away, and then he'd drive me back to Tavistock, where my parents would then pick me up at 10 o'clock at night to drive me home. And yeah, it's people like that that just sort of make things happen, play a big
Yeah.
part. And yeah, every week I'd have the same story about how he never got his driving license, and he got given it as a firefighter in the war, so never actually had to pass his test.
Oh,
And
really?
he was a real a real gentleman. But it was just quite funny, those sort of stories. And it's people like that that made it possible. And yes, I was lucky I was at a private school, but my parents didn't have the time or the money to give me that extra to sort of take me to training and things. So
Yeah.
that played a big part. But it was ultimately the failure of not being able, not making it, realizing at about the age of 15 I was not good enough as a swimmer. I couldn't train harder. There wasn't anything else. There was nothing I wasn't doing. I just didn't have quite the ability.
And that's just, yeah, and that is just sometimes life, isn't it? People get really upset about things, but it doesn't matter how hard you try. Sometimes you're not good enough at things.
Yeah. And I, was just so good in training. One of my friends would often beat me in races, and even the coach said to me though, and this was again the man who'd coached me from a very young age, and he was a man of very few words. He's Scottish, and if you got a compliment from Archie, it was like, wow, that means a lot. Now we're always encouraged to be so positive and encouraging, and sometimes it just makes you remember, like, actually, it's much more valuable if you don't get it. He was not mean, he wasn't nasty, but he was just told you the training, told you how it was, and you see how hard I was trying and how just wasn't quite getting the results. And he's like, you'll make it one day. And I didn't dare ask what he meant by that. I didn't, but it just, that seed had been sown. And I was just like, well, Archie said that, what does that mean? And it wasn't, I came back with my medal in 2008, and there was this sort of special moment. He'd retired by then. His father was coaching me, actually. His son, sorry, was coaching me. But
Wow.
yeah, he just looked at me and said, I told you. So sometimes having someone who believes as well.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I suppose there's a few questions from that. One, I suppose, when the introduction of modern pentathlon is brought in for females to compete as well at an Olympic level, and you're talking about you're very fortunate that you've got a role model within the situation that you're at, the club that you're at and whatnot. Was there automatically a big spike in interest where all of a sudden competition became very high for places, or was it actually your role model was a pioneer and there still wasn't a lot of people looking to be in the sport, and therefore, not that you had a better opportunity, but it was the path was a little bit clearer than other people getting there because you already had someone who had done that?
I think actually the opposite in a way, because they were still trying to. I mean, UK Sport Funding came in for the sport in 1997,
Right.
And they had the talent ID coaches out there, and it was actually a talent ID coach who saw me at the Nationals of Pentathlon, where I won and I beat one of the girls who I didn't know what pentathlon was, and one of these girls everyone was talking about, oh, it's Georgina Harlan, she's just come back from winning junior worlds or something. I was like, what is even junior worlds? I had no idea, and I beat her. I remember beating her in a swim, but I wasn't swimming 10 times a week, so I should have done. But and everyone was sort of excited about this, and I didn't know who she was, and I remember it was like I beat her overall, and obviously there was no fencing involved. And then this coach came and said, "Have you considered modern pentathlon?" And I didn't really know what it was, and I was like, "Oh." And I remember when I did start, there was lots of girls. I went along to the very first competition, had GBR on their back, and and I didn't even know what it was, and I was thinking, "Gosh, this is quite intimidating." But I suppose it was still young, but it was the competition was already, I think people knew about it a lot longer than I did, and it was already growing, and it boomed already so quickly because we won a gold and a bronze in Sydney. So suddenly all these young girls who'd already had come up, because through the schools there's biathlon as well, which is another entry route into it. So swimming and running, which still is one of the feeders into the sport, and our school did that. So I had actually competed with the school as a swimmer in the biathlon. So I sort of was aware of a little bit of the pathway, but yes. I don't know. It's hard to sort of answer that question because, I almost need to speak to someone who then came into the sport, around London 2012 time and see how that was. And
No.
I think it has definitely continued to grow. But and again, I think the competition's healthy. But at the time I was joining, we already had an Olympic gold medalist and Olympic bronze medalist, and then multiple world champions. So I had a lot of people to look up to, and the standard had been set very high.
And from the way you described it, then the fact that you kind of didn't totally understand what pentathlon was, weren't really sure what was going on. Do you think that naivety a little bit really helped you when it was all of a sudden it was being introduced to you, because you had no expectations, you weren't entirely sure what it was, and you look at the disciplines in there, the shooting, the running, the swimming, running. It was really only fencing that you had to add to the arsenal of what you couldn't do. And I'm sure there's a lot of transferable skills from what you were doing from a movement point of view. Or was fencing just something totally alien when you first took that up?
It was pretty alien. I remember at my first secondary school, so this is the comprehensive, that when I joined in, age 11, I was just wanted to do every sport, and I looked at the after school clubs, and one of the clubs was a fencing club, and I genuinely, and I still like, it's a bit embarrassing, but it's completely genuine. I just went, like, I questioned, and no one gave me the answer. Why was there a club for building fences? Like, I didn't get that. Like, I came from, I lived on a farm, and I just thought it was literally for building fences to keep animals in. And I was just like, it was quite bizarre. I did not know that fencing was sword fighting. I had no
That's
idea.
brilliant.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I could have started fencing 5 years, 6 years earlier, but I didn't. So, yeah, I was that naive with what fencing was. And I did start from scratch. And I went along to the local club in, half an hour away in Plymouth. And I remember just like hating it, to be honest, because there were kids I was 16, and there were kids who were 12, 13 who were way better than me, and it was
Yeah.
quite humiliating. And you just come home covered in bruises, and I was knackered going anyway because I'd already swam twice that day.
Yeah.
And it was just, but I was doing it very much for a purpose. I was doing it to do modern pentathlon. I wasn't doing it because I wanted to go fencing. So it
So
was,
is that when you were ID'd? Was it about 16 years of age? Was it for the
yeah,
modern pentathlon?
yeah, 16, yeah, I think so.
When when you are ID'd, what's the conversation? Is it very much a case of we see you as a super talent and we think you could be the next GB athlete, or is it a case
No,
of
it was very much more subtle than that, and they definitely didn't blow any sort of smoke. And I think, but then also, I'm quite modest. I wouldn't have heard it if they had, probably. But it was more like, have you heard of this? There's these opportunities. Have you thought of entering this event? We suggest you go and enter this, and you learn to fence. And then it was more just by seeing the other girls competing. And I remember I waited and waited, and that's like one thing in hindsight. I wish I had more of a mentor who said, you should enter. I was waiting to find a novice modern pentathlon event to enter, because
right,
I was like, well, I'm obviously a novice. I'm brand new at this sport. But it didn't, my brain didn't go, well, you're very experienced at 4. You've only just, you're only novice at 1,
yeah,
5th. And I waited for this novice competition. And I remember it being about 3 hours drive. We lived down in Devon, so everything was miles away. My parents did take me to this event because I had no other way of getting there. And I was so nervous. And I remember, fencing, everyone had GBR on their back in the fencing. But it's one hit fencing. And as a beginner, you're going to get some hits anyway. It's just
yeah, of
beginner's
course,
luck. And so it wasn't too horrific. The swim I excelled at the run I was pretty good at. And then the bit that sort of upset me the most, I didn't realize that in modern pentathlon, the last thing, if you come up through the ranks, you add is the riding. And the riding was a novice element, and the riding was so small, the jumps. And I was really just disappointed that was
really,
my, one of my biggest strengths was just not tested. And I was like, oh, why have I waited all this time for this, for this novice competition? So that was, yeah. So it wasn't sort of brought right in straight away by any means. But then, and one of the girls who I beat was about to go off to some competition in the Czech Republic, and I hadn't travelled very much. And I remember thinking, "Wow, like I beat her, but why is she going? Like, how do I do that?" So it was more just, through that of just, I guess, proving myself, and just seeing what other girls were already doing, and yeah, wanting to be like them, or on travel. That was like
yeah,
a big incentive too.
100%. So you've done the first novice competition, and you've obviously, from the sound of it, you've just thought, right, I need to be doing the highest level one. How did that first? Can you remember the first competition where you've said, "Well, I'm not doing novice anymore. I'm gonna go into the deep end."
I did go to another local one that was not a novice, and I remember enjoying the show jumping, but I can't remember it very well. But it was more, it quite quickly escalated. I mean, I was still at school. I was still on a swimming scholarship, so swimming was still my thing, even though I knew. And bizarrely, my swimming improved. Like, I actually got my first gold medal at county championships in medley swimming. So I was always on the podium, but just not. And I swam well at nationals, so it was almost as though like I was maturing as well. But whilst I was at school, I got selected to go to Youth A World Championships, and they were in Florida, in
Wow.
Orlando. And I remember just thinking, wow, this is like bizarre. Like, they put up a marquee in SeaWorld, and it was the humidity and things that I'd never experienced. And I was pretty miles down. It was interesting to see what we were up against internationally,
Yeah.
but just suddenly getting that opportunity early on, but also there was no riding, because at Youth A they don't have the riding. So I was like, oh,
Right.
this is bizarre. But yeah, I still didn't really think, I could be good at this. I was just like, this, I'm just going to grab every opportunity, because it's great fun to get to do this, and
Yeah.
and have these opportunities.
At what point did you enter that GB program?
Well, I do remember when I was at school, I think my last year of school, I got £2,000 for the year of
Wow.
from UK Sport from sort of beginning funding, and that was just incredible. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, there's so much
Rich.
money. Yeah. So that was, I guess, I was then sort of on the very bottom rungs of the program, and then the decision came with university, and that was a bit of a challenge because the National Training Centre is Bath, and we went to look at Bath, and they had an incredible sports science course, which was requiring very high grades. I think it was two A's and a B. You needed to do sports science there. But I was also having the other side. My school was quite traditional, that you can't go do PE A level. I mean, at GCSE. What am I talking about at university? And and I was, yeah, basically went down the channel of physiotherapy and thought that that's a proper degree. But my coach at the time, who was the son of Archie, my coach Robin, was also warning me that you won't be able to train for modern pentathlon and study physiotherapy because it's just not possible. The hours are too
Right.
much, and so I was really torn with what to do. And then I was getting the coaches saying, if you're on funding, you need to come to train in Bath and do a degree there.
Right.
And it was back and forth, and I just decided it's only 3 years, and I need to get a degree that is useful, that I want that. And so I went to Brunel University in London and was the only one in my sort of cohort of athletes that wasn't training at the University of Bath.
Wow.
So it was, the next 3 years were challenging, but they made me stronger. They were definitely up and down, and I had to be very self-disciplined because I had to train with individual clubs for all of it. Plus,
Yeah.
I represented the uni swimming, cross country, did a bit of riding, but realized I didn't have the time to commit to the riding club. And also played a bit of lacrosse for the first year, and then realized I can't fit that in as well. And trying to study for physio, which included placement. So you'd have 4 weeks and 6 weeks of basically working 8 till 4 in a hospital, plus traveling across London to get to it. So it was, yeah, it was a challenge, but it was one that I never regretted. Never went, oh, I wish I wasn't doing this. Well, I
Such
probably did
such a
momentarily.
such a big decision to make at such a young age as well, because
Yeah,
how many people go to uni and still don't know what they really want to do for a career, but you obviously
yeah.
had a really good idea what you wanted to do. And also, we know that being an athlete isn't something that lasts forever. Unfortunately, everyone
Mm.
has the day, and it comes to an end, and you had that then to, I suppose, fall back on, if you want to say that. What was did that Was that detrimental anyway from the coach's point of view, from a GB point of view? At some point,
Mm.
you're saying you still
Mm.
did that, but as a coach, I suppose it's very easy for them to go, well, we've got an abundance of talent across the UK.
Yeah,
And just a number almost. And if you don't
yeah.
want to be where we're suggesting, okay, how is it that you've managed to sustain that and actually still be part of that program?
I didn't. There was a big blip in my second year, and it all sort of, at the time it felt like the world was crashing down with it. But I had, I guess, a strong network around me, and I still had like my coach Robin Brew and his father Archie, the sort of dynasty that I had back at home. Even though it was my school, they were still, it was more than that. I'd left school, but whenever I came back home, we lived 5-10 minutes away. They were kind of coaching me and mentoring me, and I was selected for junior Europeans, which was a big thing, and I'd earned my place, and I got deselected. This is whilst in London, and the reasons given were weak, were poor. I begged, I pretty much begged, and I was like, I want a place on that plane, and they didn't even replace me. They just left. I was sent an email with my plane ticket that I was going to the European Championships. I had an injury at the time, but I was studying physiotherapy, and and I knew my body very well already at that point because I'd trained so hard as a swimmer. And biggest problem being, as a swimmer, I was very mobile, and I'd had no resilience to run volume and fencing volume. So I had a lot of niggles and injuries for a long time until I got strong enough. So I was a very late developer in that sense. But long story short, I'd got knocked off my bike cycling to a placement, but it wasn't too bad. Like, I knew I had some muscle damage and some soreness, but it wasn't. And I told them, and I, in hindsight, shouldn't have told them. And then the reason I was given, I was deselected, and I heard through a friend before the coaches told me, and it was just devastating.
Right.
I'd even changed my placement, so it was more that I felt like embarrassed because the university had helped me to move my placement a week so I could go to these European Championships. It's a big deal. But physiotherapy is physio first, sport second. It's not like a sports science degree.
Yeah.
And and I rang the coach, and he said it wasn't my decision, it's the performance director's decision, and they never really got an answer other than that we don't know how fit you are. I was like, but can I not prove how fit I am? And there was there was no that no one came to see me to test or anything, and yeah, I didn't get to go to those junior Europeans, and I came home for the week and sort of convalesced, and then decided that that was in the term time. It was sort of May of 2003, and then I was like, well, the summer I can all I can do is just prove how fit I am, and I trained incredibly hard. And junior worlds were in September, just before going back to uni. And I remember thinking I was selected, but I just didn't believe them. I was like, I don't
Right.
believe I'm going until I'm literally getting on that airplane.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't trust. And I worked so hard. And yeah, and I got there and I was just like, it was just this sort of relief of being at Junior Worlds. And I came home with 3 medals, one of which was the junior world champion title. So as an
Wow.
individual. So that was my first point of like real, oh, I could do something more. It was just then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal, isn't it? And you think, again, the age you're at, studies, the pressures of doing university, and you haven't crumbled, even though you're not within. You've purposely took yourself away from the setup, I suppose. Where,
Mm.
let's be honest, a lot of it's politics and inner circles and who you know, not what you know. And I suppose you're fortunate that you had good coaches and role models within your hometown and where you used to train. Well, that's a big decision to make, and many other people would have went, "Well, I've been deselected. That's probably my chances gone." But your mindset's been very much actually, I know I should be there. I'm going to prove to them that I should be there. And you've almost left them no position to say anything other than you are selected. You're in the team, which is I find that really really fantastic. So you come back from a junior world championships as world champion. What's that like then? Is it coming back as a because I've won it in my sport and I know that, but life never changed with except for within the sport. But that feeling of on top of the world. What was it like for you coming back to be able to say, "Well, I'm a world champion"?
Well, it was weird because I was just straight back into uni because I was like, right, I've got to catch up. They were like, I think I might have missed the first inset day or something. So it was just the university where did sort of celebrate it a bit. And the only thing I did notice, I started to try to like go, oh, could I get some sponsorships and funding? And it was more of that of like, oh, I've got some results that I could start to use for it. And it was strange because it was a year before obviously the Athens Olympics.
Yeah,
And suddenly people were asking like, oh, are you going to the Olympics? I was like, well, absolutely not. But it wasn't until someone pointed out that actually I got ranking points from that, and if I wasn't in a country that was so strong, in theory I could actually qualify for Athens. But and then I went and competed at a senior World Cup and medaled at that. So not a World Cup, sorry, a senior international. So there was suddenly like people were planting the seed for me. I was like, oh, and it was just in my mind we had 5 very strong senior athletes at that point, but
yeah,
it just made I think people look at me differently. So I was just treated slightly differently in the way taken a bit more seriously maybe.
yeah. That's really interesting. People are planting the seed. At what point? And obviously, you get 2004 out the way of that next cycle begins again. And obviously, within the sport, I'm sure some people are starting to go, well, actually, I'm time to drop out of this cycle. I don't want to do another 4 year cycle. There's opportunities coming up. At what point did you enter the cycle then for 2008 when that seed's been planted?
I'm going to have to summarize the next 4 years because we haven't got all day, but um, it was a very interesting time. But then basically was told that you finish university, you come now and train full time in Bath, or you go and do your own thing, and we're not, and goodbye. So that was the ultimatum was put there on the table. I applied for some jobs as a physio because I didn't want to waste my degree, and maybe I didn't put my heart into it. I didn't get the job. Applied for a job at Exeter Hospital, didn't get it. Part of me was maybe like, oh well, I don't have to go work full time yet. I'll come to Bath and train full time. So I arrived at Bath University in the January, quite sort of open minded and a bit like, oh, this is cool. And it was amazing. I was on level B funding on UK Sport, which was just having been a student, I was just like, this is wow. Like I'm
I'm
living my
rich.
best life. Yeah, I'm living my best life. And I must admit, I lived in a student house and probably didn't quite have the right mindset. I'd worked so hard until now, and it was almost like everything was a bit too easy. Training was you didn't have to get up at 5 in the morning to go training. You turned up training at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and everything was there in one building, and it was all just really cool. And I had some money in my bank, and but also the biggest problem being I had coached myself or managed myself, I should say, continually the whole my career. Obviously as a swimmer I was just doing exactly what I was told, but then when I started bringing in running and fencing, it was only I was the one who directed that and managed it. I had constant shin splints at uni, but I was a physio. I was stuck
Yeah,
with other physios, so I just managed my body very well. And I came to Bath, and I was still only 18, and I was having to train like the 20, 21 year olds who'd come from much different backgrounds, and my body just couldn't take it. And I had constant injuries. And I was then the coaches saw it more as they didn't understand me, didn't know me as a person at all, because they thought I was lazy. They thought I didn't want to train, and
Yeah.
that absolutely blew my mind, because I was the opposite. I'd be going and doing extra training if I could. And long and short of it, a year later, I was off the program and banned from using the building, because I didn't quite fit. I questioned things. I was very I'm someone who needs to know why I'm doing something. And once I know why, and if I want to do it, I will do it absolutely 100%. And and then the injuries included. I was told that I wasn't doing my rehab properly, and I just religiously did my rehab, but
Yeah.
the results, my body wasn't healing. Um, and yeah, so I went back down to Devon to go and work at home and get some jobs and see what I could do. And I gave myself 12 months. See, and more because my parents were like, it's probably time we went and got a job now. But they very kindly let me live. They didn't give me money, but they let me live at home for rent free. And my old swimming club, well, school, let me train for free with them. I went back to my fencing club. I did have to, pay for that, and but I would save up for the odd riding lesson. But riding was not, was a strong point anyway, and
Yeah.
and shot and could shoot at home and could run on my own. So, and I worked in the local pub. I taught swimming, and I did a bit of sports massage, trying to keep my physio job alive, and had to prioritize. I sort of dropped strength conditioning training because that took time that I didn't feel I needed, and so I had to be sort of very, manage my time very well, and let my body kind of recover. It was actually a hip injury that originally I went off with, and I just remember thinking I just want to be able to run without pain and sort that out, and eventually I did, and that was suddenly took us to beginning of 2007 was when I actually competed at the nationals that winter, and got selected to compete at a few internationals, and that was sort of the trajectory into Beijing.
Wow. Olympics then. You've qualified, you're there. What sum up that experience?
Very surreal, because I mean, for me, it was a bit like before, just actually being on that plane to Beijing. I'd made it. I knew I had done all the hard work. There's nothing more I could do at that point, and it was just such a privilege, such an honor. Something I didn't really dream of, because it seemed too far away to even be a dream. And I was going with one of my best friends. Well, she is one of my best friends now. So there was so much. I was just so grateful to be that. But even little things. I remember being so excited that we're flying business class to Beijing. Things like that. I was literally a rabbit in headlights, but I wasn't overwhelmed by it. I was just enjoying every moment of it,
Yeah.
and all the kit that we got, and being able to meet all these other incredible athletes who I see as sort of heroes and things. So it was just it was a dream come true that was more than a dream.
When does the switch flick then? Because it must be really hard, and I'm sure some of the athletes out there, that switch doesn't flick at times, or maybe doesn't flick the way they want it to, where you like you say, you're enjoying this experience, you're really grateful, you think, oh wow, this is real, but you're there to do a job and you're there to compete. Obviously you did fantastic at that competition. When was it when the switch flicks and all of a sudden you go, okay, this is amazing, wow, but I can't be in awe of it all. I need to just concentrate on being
Yeah,
Heather Fell. I
yeah.
need to do the job.
I think I mean, there was one time when Katie and we only arrived into the village 3 days before our event, so we had to deal with jet lag, which was quite tough. But it was a decision our performance directors made to basically not let us get overwhelmed and waste too much energy in the village, because our competition was near the end, and we. We were bumping into a few of the rowers, and I remember chatting to one of them, and they were like, "Oh, girls, how did you get on in your competition?" And we were like, "Oh no, we compete in like 2 days time." They're like, "What? You seem like really relaxed." And I was almost the naivety, I think, of that, of just like we were there enjoying that, but yet we still, we knew how to do modern pentathlon with our eyes closed, and then we were still competing against exactly the same people that we
Yeah.
competed against all the time. So it was another competition, and you just sort of separate each event. But you sort of say, when did you switch? Like, even the morning of the competition, I mean, I'm not a morning person, even though I swam early mornings my whole life. And my friend, I shared a room. We didn't have to, but I shared a room with her, because I just thought, that's normal for us. We share a room and we chat. And she was like, "Heather, I'm not waiting for you this morning. I'm going on to breakfast." And I remember struggling to get out of bed to get to breakfast, because I was like, "Oh gosh, I've got the competition today." So it was just normal. It was and then during it, we silly things that, like, you might, high performance people might look at and going, "Gosh, what did they do wrong?" But we're wanting our nails painted with Union Jacks, and we're checking that they were right, and we actually were doing our makeup, because we're on television. We're never on television in modern pentathlon. And so it was like, yes, you switch, but you only need to switch just as you actually, in shooting. It was shooting was the first thing, and you just need to stay calm, and all you need to do is focus on your sights and the target. And once you do your warm up, that's when you're in that. But you don't need. in my, our minds, we didn't need to be there before that. And
Yeah.
even in between time, we were there sort of waving at friends and family. And, it was just an enjoyable day when we had 5 disciplines in between where we had to sort of get our heads down.
Well, it's nice that you were able to enjoy the experience rather than being in all of it or just taking it all in. It's really good. And the mindset, obviously, quite methodical and logical. And I think that's fantastic. Stand on the podium, silver medalist. You've kind of the second best in the world on the biggest stage ever. What is that feeling like?
It was really surreal. I do remember thinking of what Archie had said, of that, wow, like how did I ever get here? Like what am I doing here? But it was just it was just sheer joy. I just yeah, I mean, it's all it's weird. It's all a bit of a blur. I think anything that's incredible or awful in your life becomes a bit of a blur. But yeah, the fact that so many people, even though it was all the way over in China, had come. There was so many Union Jack flags everywhere, and it was just like, wow, this is just amazing. It was like, but it didn't feel like it was me on my own. It felt like it was just a celebration of
Yeah.
everybody's effort that had come to support me, and but also the people who hadn't made it out there who'd played such a big part.
And how did life change when you returned home? Has it changed your life?
Massively, but I think it's funny because people recently have had a baby, but has your life changed? But our lives are continually changing, but maybe it just takes a sort of bigger leap at the time. And oh, it was amazing. I mean, people talk about the blues, but I never really had them because I just embraced everything. There were parties, there were sponsorships, there were photo shoots, there were, and I'm very social. And it was just great to sort of mix with all the other sports and go to all these events and be in the same sort of, I had an amazing relationship with Adidas for 5 years, and I met so many other great athletes and learned from them, from being at events with those guys and going to wearing lovely dresses and just all of that. It's just like a bit like being Cinderella for a few years. And I did actually at the end of that sort of, I took those few months, and at Christmas time I went to Australia for a month, and that was almost my reset of like, I need to work up what I'm going to do and come back and start training in the new year. But everything life became easier. It was, yeah, it was great. And I also just had that respect from the coaches to sort of actually listen to me, and
Yeah.
like I do know what I'm doing, and I did want to train, because the whole build up to the games was stressful. It was difficult, and that is another conversation. But I was still not on funding. I was getting some funding help, but I wasn't on funding because I was
Wow.
doing what I wanted to lead it more myself, because I knew it was one of those. It's like I could be on funding, but I felt like I needed to use my coaches at home who knew me, and I needed to do what was right for me to get my best.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing. I know you've got a little one to put to sleep. So, a last question, I suppose, is what would be your advice to somebody? What's your piece of advice if anyone's asking for it? And it could be sport, it could just be life in general.
I think it's when those awful moments happen, you're allowed to wallow in them. You're allowed to like take that moment, and whatever it is, it's horrific at the time, but you just have to know at the back of your mind it will make you stronger. There will be a reason and a benefit to that time, and so you won't see it for maybe a long time after, but when you will eventually, and you'll look back at that and go, God, that was absolutely appalling, but look where I am now because of that. And that's why I think it's like, people say, do you have regrets or not? But you learn from every mistake. You learn from things that are out of your control, or even if you don't learn, you get stronger from them. And I just think it's that, yeah, that the highs are high because the lows are low, and that's life. It's a roller coaster, and yeah, almost the harder you get hit, the higher you jump back up.
I love it. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I am thinking about doing. I've got a conversation coming up with somebody in the next couple of weeks, and I'm thinking about asking athletes and people who've competed, how has your mindset changed? Because I was doing some with a friend the other day, and it was just going for a run. I'm not a runner whatsoever, so it was just plodding along. And in my head, I've still got a winner's mentality, but I feel like it's changed. So now it's very much, my winning is very different. It's just about completing something rather than I've got to be the best at it. Has your mentality changed since you've stopped competing? And if so, how's it adapted?
I think it's always just like, I like working hard, and that I know that I need to do things that scare me, because then I get more of a reward from them. And it's interesting. I was chatting to a friend yesterday about it, with a fellow Olympian actually, and she's totally put to bed her She won a silver medal in bob skeleton, but she has no desire to compete or do that anymore. And I do. And to start with, I thought, is it because I haven't put it to bed? But it's just made me realize that I like a challenge, and that's what makes me happy. So I know, I'm now into running ultras and doing long distance triathlons and those sorts of things, because it slightly scares me, and I like to be put out of my comfort zone to then enjoy my comfort zone. I feel like sometimes when I go, oh, this is really hard, why am I doing this? Or I don't want to work, and having had maternity leave, I've wanted to go back to work because I want to enjoy the time off. And I think life is about that balance, and it's still just being uncomfortable is healthy for us. And I think as an athlete, you don't even have the choice in that. And I think for mental health, it's hugely important, because sometimes when you naturally as humans, we want to be happy, we want to be comfortable, but I find I can't have comfortable without the uncomfortable.
I like it. Heather, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Andy, thank you. Yeah, we could have chatted all day, but thanks very much for your time as well.